5-year-old triplets meet the dad they never knew in the hospital hallway while mom is hospitalized. Before we begin, tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today? The marble floors of Boston Memorial Hospital echoed with purposeful footsteps as James Westbrook adjusted his Italian silk tie one final time. At 38, he commanded boardrooms across 3 continents, but today's press conference felt different, more personal than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. $10 million to the Rare Disease Research Wing, he murmured to himself, practicing the words that would soon make headlines. This wasn't just philanthropy. 5 years ago, his father had died from a condition so rare that most doctors had never seen a case. The memory still haunted James, watching the strongest man he'd ever known waste away while he threw money at specialists who could only offer sympathy. His assistant briefed him on the final details as they walked toward the conference room, but James's mind wandered to the empty penthouse that awaited him after today's ceremony. Despite his fortune, despite the empire he'd built from nothing, he returned each night to silence and designer furniture that had never felt like home. As camera flashes began popping and reporters settled into their seats, James stepped up to the podium. But before he could speak, his thoughts betrayed him once again, drifting to Catherine Collins, the woman whose laughter once filled his college apartment, whose paintings covered every wall, whose dreams he'd abandoned for Asian markets and profit margins. It had been almost 6 years since their bitter goodbye, when she'd refused to follow him overseas and he'd chosen his ambition over her heart. He wondered sometimes if she still painted sunsets the way she used to, still believed in love stories that lasted forever. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, his voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath his expensive suit. "Today, we take a step toward ensuring no family suffers the way mine did." The press conference had ended with handshakes and congratulations, but James felt restless. Instead of heading to his waiting limousine, he dismissed his driver and chose to walk alone through the hospital's quieter corridors. Something about the sterile hallways reminded him of those final weeks with his father. The smell of disinfectant, the hushed conversations, the weight of hope slowly fading. He found himself in the Special Treatments Wing, a section he'd helped fund but never actually visited. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. That's when he saw them. 3 identical little girls, perhaps 5 years old, stood near the nurse's station like a living rainbow. One wore a bright red dress, another blue, and the third yellow. They watched him with the uninhibited curiosity that only children possess, their dark eyes tracking his every movement. James stopped walking. Something about them made his chest tighten. Not just their striking appearance, but something familiar he couldn't quite place. The girl in red crossed her arms in a gesture so achingly familiar that his breath caught. It was a defensive stance he'd seen before, years ago, in a cramped art studio when discussions about the future grew heated. "Excuse me," he heard himself saying to a passing nurse. "Those little girls, are they patients here?" The nurse smiled warmly. "Oh, the Collins triplets. No, they're visiting their mother. Poor little things have been here every day for weeks. Their mom is in room 314. Such a sweet family." Collins. The name hit him like a physical blow. James felt the blood drain from his face as mathematical. Possibilities raced through his mind. Collins was a common name, he told himself. It had to be a coincidence. But as he watched the girls whispering among themselves, he noticed other details that made his hands shake. The way the one in blue tilted her head when thinking. The stubborn set of the yellow-dressed girl's jaw. The protective way Red positioned herself slightly in front of her sisters. "Are you okay, sir?" the nurse asked, noticing his pale complexion. James forced a smile. "Fine, they remind me of someone." James barely slept that night. By dawn, he was pacing his penthouse office, cell phone pressed to his ear. "I need you to run a discreet background check," he told his private investigator. "Catherine Collins, likely in her mid-30s, Boston area. She has 3 daughters, triplets, approximately 5 years old." The call came back within hours, and the news shattered James's carefully constructed world. Catherine Collins, age 35, had been hospitalized for 3 weeks with systemic lupus, an autoimmune disease that had severely worsened. More devastating, her triplets had been born 5 years and 3 months ago, almost exactly 9 months after their relationship had ended. James stared at the medical timeline his investigator had compiled. The math was undeniable. He grabbed his jacket and headed straight for the hospital. "Dr. Martinez," James introduced himself to Catherine's physician. "I'm James Westbrook. I understand you're treating a patient with lupus, Catherine Collins. I'm interested in funding research for autoimmune diseases." Dr. Martinez, a kind man in his 50s, spoke carefully about patient confidentiality but shared general information. "Miss Collins is responding to treatment, but slowly. The experimental medications aren't covered by insurance, which creates additional stress for a single mother, already struggling financially." Single mother. The words echoed in James's mind as he excused himself and walked to the hospital's garden. Through the window he could see the 3 girls playing with an older woman, their aunt, most likely. He studied their faces with new eyes, searching for traces of himself. The girl in red, so serious, so protective, had his grandmother's determined chin. The one in blue shared his own habit of observing everything before speaking. And the little one in yellow. She had his mother's expressive eyes, the same ones that used to dance with mischief. His daughters. The realization hit him like a tsunami, washing away 6 years of carefully built emotional walls. Catherine had been pregnant when he left for Asia, and she'd never told him. These beautiful, innocent children were his, and he'd missed their entire lives. First steps, first words, first everything. Standing in that garden, James Westbrook felt something he'd never experienced in any boardroom. Complete and utter helplessness mixed with a love so fierce it terrified him. James spent 2 days researching before approaching Melissa Rodriguez, Catherine's sister, and a literature professor at Boston University. He waited outside her evening class, rehearsing words that seemed inadequate for the magnitude of the situation. "Professor Rodriguez?" he called as she emerged from the building. "I'm James Westbrook. I believe we need to talk about Catherine." "And the girls!" Melissa's face hardened instantly. Even at 52, she carried herself with the same fierce protectiveness he'd noticed in the red-dressed triplet. "So you finally figured it out," she said coldly. "The great James Westbrook, destroyer of dreams, has done his homework." "I had no idea." "Of course you didn't." Melissa's voice rose, causing passing students to stare. "You were too busy conquering Asia to notice that the woman you claimed to love was carrying your children. Catherine called you twice when she found out she was pregnant. Your assistant said you were unavailable for personal calls." The accusation hit like a physical blow. James remembered those months, the crucial negotiations, the 18-hour days, the decision to have his assistant screen all non-business calls. "I never got those messages." "It doesn't matter now," Melissa said, her voice bitter. "Catherine made her choice. She decided that a man who prioritized profit over love didn't deserve to know about his daughters." "They're my daughters, too," James said quietly. "I have rights." "Rights?" Melissa laughed harshly. "You forfeited those rights when you chose your empire over their mother. Those girls have never needed you before. Why should they now?" The argument continued for 20 minutes, Melissa's anger years in the making. Finally, she pulled a weathered shoebox from her car. "Catherine wrote to you," she said, her voice suddenly tired. "Letters she never sent. Maybe they'll help you understand what you really lost." That night, James sat in his study reading letter after letter in Catherine's familiar handwriting. The first, dated 6 months after he'd left. "The baby kicked. Today. I wonder if you'd care that it's actually babies. 3 of them. I wonder if you'd come back if you knew." Another, written when the girls were 6 months old. "Olivia rolled over today. She's so determined. Just like someone else I used to know. Emma watches everything with these serious eyes, and Sophia laughs at absolutely everything. They're perfect, James. I wish you could see them." The final letter, dated 2 years ago, destroyed him. "I saw your face on the business magazine cover. You look successful and happy. I'm glad I never sent these letters. You built the life you wanted, and we built ours without you. After 2 weeks of tense negotiations involving lawyers and family counselors, Melissa agreed to a supervised meeting. The conditions were strict. James could meet the girls, but only as a friend of their mothers, until Catherine could participate in the decision about revealing his true identity. The hospital garden became neutral ground. James arrived 15 minutes early, his palms sweating like a teenager on a first date. When Melissa appeared with the 3 girls, his heart nearly stopped. Up close, the resemblances were even more striking. "Girls, this is Mr. Westbrook," Melissa said carefully. "He's someone who knew your mother in college." The girl in red stepped forward with the poise of a tiny diplomat. "I'm Olivia," she announced, studying James with suspicious eyes. "This is Emma," she gestured to her blue-dressed sister. "And that's Sophia." The yellow-clad girl offered a shy wave. "It's wonderful to meet you," James managed, kneeling to their eye level. "Your mother used to tell me stories about 3 very special little girls." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Mama never mentioned you. If you were friends, how come we never heard about you?" The question pierced through James's practiced composure. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "grown-ups take different paths in life, and they lose touch with people who were important to them. That doesn't mean they stop caring." Emma, who had been silently observing, suddenly spoke. "Are you the reason Mama sometimes looks sad when she sees families with daddies?" The innocent question hit harder than any business rival's attack. Melissa intervened quickly. "Emma, that's enough questions for now." But Sophia, the little empath, had been studying James's face. "Why do your eyes look sad like Mama's?" she asked with startling directness. James felt his composure cracking. These weren't just random children. They were his children, carrying pieces of his heart he never knew he'd left behind. "Sometimes," he whispered, "people make mistakes that hurt the people they love most. And that makes them very, very sad." Olivia's protective instincts kicked in. "Did you hurt our mama?" The question hung in the garden air like a thundercloud. James looked at each beautiful face, seeing Catherine in their expressions, seeing himself in their gestures. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I did. And I'm sorrier than you could ever know." Over the following 2 weeks, James established a careful routine. Every day after work, he'd arrive at the hospital carrying coffee for Melissa and small gifts for the girls. Never expensive toys, but thoughtful items like colored pencils for Olivia's sketches, astronomy books for Emma, and sheet music for Sophia's humming. "You don't have to bring us things," Olivia said one afternoon, though she clutched her new sketchpad protectively. "Mama says people who really care don't need to buy caring." "Your mother is very wise," James replied, watching as Emma devoured a book about black holes with the intensity of a graduate student. "I bring these because I noticed what makes each of you happy. Olivia, you see beauty everywhere and try to capture it. Emma, you want to understand how everything works? And Sophia," he turned to the youngest, who was softly singing to a stuffed animal, "you make everyone around you feel better just by being yourself." Emma looked up from her book. "How did you know we were different? Most people think we're exactly the same." "Because," James said, settling into the chair beside their usual spot in the family lounge, "I've been watching you. Really watching. Olivia draws when she's worried. I've seen her sketching every time your mama has a bad day. Emma asks questions when she's scared because understanding makes her feel safer. And Sophia. She takes care of everyone's feelings even when she's hurting too." The girls exchanged glances, communicating in that silent language twins and triplets develop. Finally, Olivia spoke. "Mama taught us that being identical on the outside doesn't mean we have to be identical on the inside." "She's absolutely right," James said. "You're 3 completely different people who happen to share the same beautiful face." Later that evening, as James prepared to leave, Sophia tugged on his jacket. "Mr. Westbrook, will you still come see us when Mama gets better and we go home?" The question revealed the fear beneath her cheerful exterior, the terror that everyone they cared about eventually disappeared. James knelt down, looking directly into eyes that mirrored his own. "Sophia, I promise you this. I will be here as long as you want me to be. Getting better doesn't mean saying goodbye." For the first time since they'd met, Olivia smiled at him, a small, tentative expression that felt like the greatest victory of his entire career. The week had been brutal. Catherine's condition had worsened suddenly, requiring emergency treatment in the ICU. The girls hadn't been allowed to see her for 3 days, and their usual brightness had dimmed to worried whispers and tear-stained cheeks. "They need a break," Melissa confided to James outside Catherine's room. "But I don't know how to give them one when I'm barely holding it together myself." James made a decision that surprised them both. "Let me take them to the cafeteria, just for ice cream. Sometimes the smallest normal things help the most." The hospital's cheerful cafeteria. The girls approached the ice cream freezer with the seriousness of judges deliberating a court case. Olivia studied every flavor twice. Emma read the ingredients on 3 different containers. Sophia changed her mind 4 times. "This is very important," Emma announced solemnly. "Ice cream choices can't be undone." James smiled, remembering similar moments from his own childhood. "You know, my dad used to take me for ice cream whenever I had to go to the doctor. He said ice cream doesn't fix anything, but it gives you strength to handle whatever comes next." "Did your daddy get sick too?" Sophia asked, finally settling. "On strawberry with sprinkles." "Yes, sweetheart. He got very sick and ice cream couldn't make him better. But those moments together, they helped us both be brave." They found a table by the window, the afternoon sun streaming across their faces. For 10 minutes the girls seemed like normal children again, giggling when Emma got chocolate on her nose, debating whether sprinkles counted as a proper topping, watching other families with the curiosity of anthropologists. Then Sophia accidentally knocked over her cup, pink ice cream splattering across her yellow dress. Instead of laughing it off as she normally would, she burst into tears, not about the ice cream but about everything she'd been holding inside. Without hesitation, James knelt beside her chair, offering his handkerchief. "It's okay to cry about the big things, Sophia. The ice cream is just the excuse." As she sobbed against his shoulder, Olivia watched with new eyes. When Sophia finally calmed down, Olivia asked the question that had been burning in her heart. "Mr. Westbrook, what was our mama like when you knew her? Before us, I mean." James's voice grew gentle. "She was exactly like you 3, brave like Olivia, curious like Emma, and kind like Sophia. She painted pictures that made people feel less alone in the world." At 3 a.m., James's phone exploded with urgent messages. His company's most crucial acquisition, a deal 18 months in, the making was collapsing. His presence was required in London within 24 hours, or Westbrook Industries would lose the European expansion that represented nearly half their projected growth. "Sir, the board is waiting for your decision," his assistant said when James called an emergency meeting. "The jet is fueled and ready." James stared out his office window toward the hospital where Catherine fought for her life, and his daughters waited for news. 6 months ago, this wouldn't have been a choice. Business always came first. Success demanded sacrifice, but now, "Reschedule the London trip," he announced to his stunned board of directors. "James, you can't be serious," his longtime business partner Richard protested. "This deal represents everything we've worked toward. You're talking about throwing away $200 million. "I'm talking about choosing what matters," James replied calmly. "Promote Jennifer to handle the negotiations. She's been preparing for this responsibility." The room erupted in arguments. His CFO slammed papers on the table. "Those children aren't even officially yours. You're destroying your legacy for a fantasy." "No," James said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I'm finally building something worth leaving behind." When Richard cornered him after the meeting, his voice was desperate. "What's happened to you? You used to understand that business requires hard choices." James looked at his oldest friend and business partner. "I made a hard choice once before, Richard. I chose profit over love, success over family. It earned me everything I thought I wanted and cost me everything that actually mattered." Meanwhile, at the hospital, The girls noticed subtle changes in their routine. James arrived earlier each morning, stayed later each evening. He asked more questions about their schoolwork, their friends, their fears. He began learning their language, the way Emma's questions multiplied when she was anxious, how Olivia's drawings reflected her mood, how Sophia's songs changed depending on her mother's condition. "You're different," Olivia observed one afternoon, as they worked on a puzzle together. "You seem more here." James paused, a puzzle piece in his hand. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what you should have been fighting for all along." That evening he sat in his empty penthouse, surrounded by awards and achievements that suddenly felt meaningless, and called a child psychologist. "I need to understand," he said, "how to help children cope when everything they've known is changing." 2 months after their first meeting, the girls' ballet teacher announced that the spring recital would proceed as planned, a tribute to Catherine, who had helped design the costumes and choreography before falling ill. James watched Melissa's internal struggle as she weighed whether the girls were emotionally ready. "Mama would want us to dance," Olivia declared with characteristic determination. She said dancing is how we share happiness with other people. The evening of the recital, James found himself in the elementary school auditorium, surrounded by chattering families and proud grandparents. He felt like an imposter among the other parents clutching a bouquet of daisies, Catherine's favorite flowers according to Emma's encyclopedic memory. When the curtain rose, the triplets appeared in matching tutus, their faces serious with concentration. The choreography was simple but beautiful, a dance about butterflies emerging from cocoons. Emma moved with precise, calculated grace. Olivia danced with fierce determination. Sophia glowed with pure joy. Halfway through the performance, Sophia spotted James in the audience. Her face lit up with such genuine delight that she nearly missed her next step, earning gentle laughter from the crowd. She waved, breaking character completely, and James felt his heart swell with pride and love so intense it was almost painful. After the recital, as other children received congratulations and photographs, James approached hesitantly. "You were all magnificent," he said, offering each girl a small bouquet. "Daisies," Emma observed approvingly. "Mama's favorites, how did you remember that?" "I remember everything your mother loved," James replied softly. Olivia accepted her flowers but studied his face with her usual intensity. "Why do you care so much about us? Is it just because we were important to Mama?" The question hung in the air as parents bustled around them. James knelt down, meeting her suspicious gaze directly. "I started caring because of your mother, Olivia. But now I care because I know who you are. You're brave and protective and talented. Emma's brilliant and thoughtful and sees everything. Sophia's kind and joyful and makes everyone around her better. I care about you because you're you." For the first time since they'd met, Olivia's defensive mask slipped completely. "What if Mama doesn't get better?" she whispered, voicing the fear that haunted all 3 girls. James pulled her into a gentle hug, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "Then we'll face whatever comes together, all of us." James spent hours researching child psychology, learning about the unique challenges faced by identical multiples. "They need to be seen as individuals," Dr. Patricia Wells, a specialist in twin development, explained during their consultation. "Identical children often struggle with identity formation when the world treats them as a unit." Inspired by this conversation, James visited a small jewelry shop in Boston's North End, owned by an elderly Italian craftsman named Giuseppe. "I need something special," James explained, "for 3 little girls who share the same face but have completely different hearts." Giuseppe's weathered hands created 3 delicate silver bracelets, each featuring a small locket with a different colored stone: ruby for Olivia, sapphire for Emma, and topaz for Sophia. Inside each locket, James had a personal message engraved. When he presented the bracelets during their usual afternoon visit, the girls examined them with the careful attention they gave to everything important. "They're beautiful," Sophia breathed, holding hers up to catch the light. "But why are they different colors?" Because, James explained, even though you look the same on the outside, each of you has a unique light inside. These remind everyone, including yourselves, that you're three separate, amazing people. Emma opened her locket and read aloud, "Your curiosity makes the world bigger." She looked up at James with surprise. "How did you know I want to be a scientist?" "Because you ask questions about everything." James smiled. "You're not satisfied with simple answers. You want to understand how the universe works." Olivia struggled with the tiny clasp on her bracelet. When James helped her, she read her message silently. "Your strength protects what matters most." Her voice was unusually quiet when she asked, "Do you really think I'm strong?" "Olivia, you're 5 years old, and you've been taking care of your sisters and worrying about your mother for months. You're the strongest person I know." For the first time, tears gathered in Olivia's eyes. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when someone finally sees you clearly. "What if I'm not strong enough if Mama?" She couldn't finish the sentence. James sat beside her on the hospital bench. "Then we'll be strong together. That's what families do. They share the weight when it gets too heavy for one person." Sophia had been quietly reading her own message. "Your joy heals broken hearts." She looked up with wonder. "Is that really what I do?" "Every single day," James assured her. "You make people smile when they thought they'd forgotten how." That evening, Melissa found James in the hospital corridor, watching through the window as the girls showed their bracelets to Catherine's sleeping form. "Thank you," she said simply. They needed someone to see them as individuals. "They deserved to be celebrated," James replied. "All this time I thought success meant building something from nothing. But watching them, they're already perfect. They just needed someone to notice." Catherine's condition stabilized into what doctors called cautious optimism. She was responding to treatment, but faced months of recovery. A new routine emerged from the chaos, one that surprised James with its natural rhythm and profound satisfaction. He rented a furnished apartment 5 minutes from both the hospital and the girls' school, trading his sterile penthouse for a place where finger paintings could be taped to refrigerators and children's laughter could echo off the walls. His corporate driver was replaced by a modest SUV with car seats and a glove compartment full of wet wipes. 3 afternoons a week, James picked up the girls from Riverside Elementary. The first time he appeared at the school gates, other parents stared curiously at the impeccably dressed businessman standing among the usual crowd of mothers and nannies. By the 3rd week, he was just Mr. Westbrook, the man who always remembered which daughter needed help with math homework and which one required extra time to process new information. "Emma needs 15 minutes to think before she answers difficult questions," he explained to their teacher, Mrs. Chen, during a parent conference he attended with Melissa. "And Sophia processes emotions through movement. If she seems restless, she's not being disruptive. She's managing her feelings." Mrs. Chen seemed impressed by his insight. "Most people assume identical children have identical needs. You've clearly taken time to understand their individual personalities." The truth was, James found himself fascinated by their differences. Olivia approached new situations with cautious assessment, like a general surveying a battlefield. Emma collected information obsessively before making decisions, surrounding herself with facts like armor. Sophia dove into experiences heart first, trusting that love would guide her safely through. Sunday mornings became sacred. Pancake Sundays, as Sophia christened them. James discovered that cooking for children required different skills than negotiating international acquisitions. Pancakes had to be perfectly round for Emma, shaped like flowers for Sophia, and served with fresh fruit arranged in patterns for Olivia's artistic eye. "Why do you make them different for each of us?" Emma asked one morning, studying her geometrically perfect stack. "Because each of you is different," James replied, flipping another pancake. "Why would I give you all the same thing when you don't want the same things?" These conversations, he realized, were the real education. The girls asked questions that cut straight to essential truths. Why do some people have daddies and others don't? Why did God make Mama sick? Why do adults sometimes make promises they can't keep? James found himself sharing stories about Catherine that painted pictures of their mother before motherhood transformed her. Your mama once spent her entire grocery money on art supplies, then lived on peanut butter sandwiches for 2 weeks because she had to finish a painting. She said some things were more important than comfort. Like taking care of us is more important than staying healthy? Olivia asked with uncomfortable insight. Your mother's illness isn't because she took care of you, James said carefully. Sometimes bodies just get sick no matter how well we take care of them. But yes, she's always put your needs before her own comfort. Emma, ever practical, asked, Is that why you started visiting us, because Mama couldn't take care of us the way she usually does? The question forced James to confront his own motivations honestly. I started coming because I was worried about you. But I keep coming because I love spending time with you. All of you make me laugh and think and want to be better than I was yesterday. Sophia crawled into his lap during one of these Sunday conversations. Do you think Mama will like having you around when she gets better? It was the question that haunted James's quiet moments. He and Catherine would need to navigate their new relationship as co-parents without the romantic history that had both connected and destroyed them. I hope so, sweetheart. But even if things are complicated between your mama and me, nothing will change how I feel about you three. Adults make things too complicated, Olivia observed with 5-year-old wisdom. We just want everyone to be happy and together. Looking at their hopeful faces gathered around his small dining table, James realized that these Sunday morning conversations had become the highlight of his week. More satisfying than any board meeting, more rewarding than any successful acquisition. For the first time in his adult life, he was building something that couldn't be measured in profit margins or stock prices. 4 months after their first meeting, Dr. Martinez delivered cautiously optimistic news. Catherine's treatment was working, but her recovery would require at least another 6 months of careful monitoring and gradual rehabilitation. The girls would need stability, routine, and space to be children while their mother healed. James looked around Catherine's small 2-bedroom apartment during one of their planning meetings with Melissa. The cramped space had served them well when it was just Catherine and the girls, but now it felt inadequate for the expanding needs of 3 growing children, a recovering mother, and the supportive aunt who'd put her own life on hold. We need more room, James said carefully, not wanting to overstep boundaries that were still being negotiated. Somewhere with space for Catherine to recover properly, room for the girls to play, and an area where she can paint again when she's ready. Melissa's expression tightened with familiar suspicion. We can't afford anything bigger, James. Catherine's medical bills have drained her savings, and I'm covering what I can on a professor's salary. I'm not suggesting you pay for it, James replied. I'm suggesting we find something that works for everyone and let me handle the finances. Not as charity, but as family taking care of family. The word hung in the air between them. Family. It was still so new, this concept of belonging to something bigger than his corporate empire. They spent 3 weekends looking at houses in family-friendly neighborhoods within reasonable distance of both the hospital and the girls' school. James let the girls and Melissa lead the search, noting what made them light up with excitement and what caused them to exchange doubtful glances. Too fancy, Emma pronounced after touring a modern mansion with sleek lines and minimalist decor. Mama likes things with character. No garden for herbs, Sophia noted sadly at another property. Mama needs her tea plants. Olivia was even more specific. The light is wrong. Mama needs morning sun for her paintings, but not so much that it washes out the colors. Finally, they found it. A charming Victorian house in Cambridge with hardwood, floors worn smooth by generations of families, large windows that caught perfect northern light, and a backyard featuring an enormous oak tree that practically begged for a treehouse. Look, Sophia squealed, running toward the tree. It's like the one in our favorite story. Emma was already calculating angles and measurements. We could build a reading nook up there, somewhere quiet to think. But it was Olivia's reaction that sealed the decision. She stood in what would become Catherine's art studio, her small hand pressed against the window glass. Mama could paint the sunrise from here, she said softly. She always said morning light makes everything look hopeful. James found himself negotiating with the seller that same afternoon, driven by an urgency he'd never felt about any business transaction. This wasn't about investment potential or market value. This was about creating a sanctuary where his fractured family could heal and grow. 6 bedrooms, he explained to the girls as they walked through again. 1 for your mama, 1 for Aunt Melissa, 1 for each of you. A guest room for when you have friends over, and my room when I stay here. When you stay here? Emma asked with characteristic precision. Not if? James knelt down to their level in the empty living room. I'd like to be part of your daily lives if you want that. Not just weekend visits or special occasions, but real family life, helping with homework, making breakfast, reading bedtime stories. The girls exchanged one of their wordless conversations, communicating with glances and subtle nods. Finally, Olivia spoke for all 3. We want that too. But what about Mama? Shouldn't she get to decide about her own house? We'll ask her, James promised. This only works if everyone agrees. That evening at the hospital, they presented their plan to Catherine, who was awake and alert for longer periods each day. James watched nervously as she studied the house photos on Melissa's tablet, her expression unreadable. It's beautiful, she said finally. But James, I can't let you buy us a house. That's too much even for... For what? He asked gently. For whatever this is between us now, she finished quietly. James sat in the chair beside her bed, acutely aware of the girls listening from their spot by the window. Catherine, I'm not trying to buy forgiveness or force my way into your life. I'm trying to give our daughters stability while you recover. After that, we'll figure out the rest as we go. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, the first strong emotion she'd shown since regaining consciousness. They need this, don't they? Space to be children instead of tiny adults worried about everything. We all need this, James admitted. Even me. I've lived in empty spaces my whole adult life. I'd like to try living in a home. Sophia, unable to contain herself any longer, bounced over to the bed. Mama, there's a perfect spot for your easel and a garden for your herbs, and the kitchen is big enough for all of us to help make dinner. Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile James had seen from her in months. It sounds perfect, baby. Girl. 2 weeks later, moving trucks arrived at the Victorian house. James had arranged for the girls' belongings to be carefully packed and transported, but he was surprised to discover how little they actually owned. Years of financial struggle had taught Catherine to value experiences over possessions, relationships over things. We travel light, Melissa explained, noticing his expression as the movers finished in less than 2 hours. That first night in the new house, James tucked each girl into their own bedroom for the first time in their lives. Olivia's room faced east for morning light. Emma's had built-in bookshelves and a reading corner. Sophia's overlooked the garden where she could watch birds and butterflies. It feels too big, Sophia whispered as he kissed her goodnight. It'll feel smaller once we fill it with memories, James promised. Give it time. Standing in the hallway afterward, surrounded by the sounds of an old house settling around its new family, James realized he'd never felt more at home anywhere in his life. 6 months had passed since James first encountered his daughters in the hospital corridor. Catherine's 36th birthday arrived on a crisp October morning, marking both her recovery milestone and the longest period of consciousness she'd maintained since her illness began. The girls had been planning for weeks, their excitement tinged with nervous energy. This would be their first real celebration with their mother in months, and they wanted everything to be perfect. James found himself coordinating with Melissa, like a party planning committee, balancing the girls' elaborate wishes with Catherine's still fragile health. She can only handle small groups for short periods, Dr. Martinez had warned during their last consultation. But emotionally, celebrating normal milestones will be crucial for her psychological recovery. The hospital room had been transformed, as much as regulations allowed. Olivia's artwork covered one wall, watercolor portraits of the family including Catherine, painted from photographs during her unconscious weeks. Emma had researched Catherine's favorite flowers and somehow convinced the hospital staff to allow a small arrangement of autumn lilies. Sophia had been practicing a song on the small keyboard James had brought for these visits. When they arrived that morning, Catherine was sitting up in bed, her hair washed and braided, a sign that she was having one of her clearer days. The girls rushed to her bedside with barely contained excitement. "Happy birthday, Mama," they chorused, each presenting their carefully prepared gifts. Catherine's hands shook slightly as she opened Olivia's handmade card, which featured a drawing of their new house with all 5 family members standing in front. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. Emma presented a bound collection of astronomy facts she'd written out in her careful handwriting. "For when you're feeling better and want to stargaze with us again," she explained seriously. Sophia's gift was the most precious, a recording she'd made on James's phone of her singing, "You Are My Sunshine," Catherine's favorite lullaby. But it was when Catherine's gaze finally landed on James that the room's atmosphere shifted. For the first time since regaining consciousness, her eyes held full recognition and awareness. The fog of medication and illness cleared, and she saw him, really saw him, standing in her hospital room with their daughters. "James," she breathed, her voice carrying 6 years of complex history. The girls, sensing the charged moment between their parents, watched with the intense curiosity of children who understood more than adults often realized. "Hello, Catherine," James said softly. "Happy birthday." "You're here," she said, still processing the reality. "With them. With our." "Mama, are you okay?" Olivia asked with immediate concern, moving protectively closer to the bed. Catherine reached for her daughter's hand, never taking her eyes off James. "I'm fine, baby. Just surprised." She paused, studying his face. "You know, don't you? About them?" Emma, with her characteristic need for clarity, spoke up. "Mama, Mr. Westbrook is our daddy. We figured it out weeks ago." The simple statement hung in the room like a revelation that was somehow both shocking and inevitable. Catherine's face cycled through a dozen emotions: surprise, fear, relief, worry. "We didn't tell you because the doctor said not to give you stressful news," Sophia added helpfully. "But it's not stressful, is it, having a daddy?" Catherine looked at each of her daughters, then at Melissa, then finally back at James. "How long have you known?" 4 months, James admitted. "Since I saw them in the corridor downstairs. They have your eyes, but they have my grandmother's stubborn chin." A laugh escaped Catherine's lips, the first genuine laughter James had heard from her in years. "God, they do, don't they? Especially Olivia when she's determined about something." "Hey," Olivia protested, but she was smiling too. The conversation that followed was unlike anything James had imagined. The girls, with their innocent directness, asked the questions that adults would have danced around. "Why didn't Daddy know about us before? Are you going to get married again? Can we have birthday cake for breakfast?" Catherine answered with remarkable honesty for a conversation happening in front of 5-year-olds. "Sometimes grown-ups make decisions they think are right at the time, but later they wonder if they made mistakes. When I found out I was pregnant with you 3, Daddy was far away building his business. I thought he was happier without me, so I decided to raise you by myself." "But you weren't really by yourself," Emma observed. "You had Aunt Melissa." "That's right," Catherine smiled. "Family comes in different shapes." James felt compelled to add his perspective. "And sometimes people grow up and realize that the things they thought were most important really weren't important at all." Later, after the girls had stepped out with Melissa to get birthday cake from the cafeteria, Catherine and James found themselves alone for the first time in over 6 years. "They're incredible," Catherine said quietly. "Beautiful, smart, kind. You've done an amazing job with them." "I've missed so much," James replied, his voice heavy with regret. "First steps, first words, first days of school." Catherine studied, his face with eyes that had always seen through his careful facades. "But you're here now. That matters more than you know." The words carried weight beyond simple forgiveness. They carried possibility, acknowledgement, and perhaps most importantly, hope for whatever came next. When the girls returned with a small birthday cake and hospital-approved candles, they sang an off-key but enthusiastic happy birthday that filled the room with joy Catherine hadn't felt in months. "Make a wish, Mama," Sophia instructed seriously. Catherine closed her eyes, surrounded by her daughters and the man who had once broken her heart, but was now helping to heal their family. When she opened them again and blew out the candles, James saw something in her expression he recognized from their college days. The look she got when she believed, despite everything, that happiness was possible. 1 week after Catherine's birthday celebration, everything shifted in a heartbeat. James was in a morning board meeting when his phone buzzed with urgent messages from Melissa. Catherine had collapsed during her morning walk around the hospital ward. Severe kidney complications, emergency surgery. Come now. He left the conference room so abruptly that his CFO called after him, but James was already running toward the elevator, his heart pounding with a terror he'd never experienced in any boardroom crisis. At the hospital, he found Melissa in the surgical waiting area, with 3 frightened little girls who looked smaller than ever in the hard plastic chairs. Their usual colorful dresses seemed muted under the harsh fluorescent lights, and their faces carried the blank shock that comes when a child's world tilts off its axis. "What happened?" James asked Melissa quietly, kneeling beside the girls. "Her kidneys started failing," Melissa explained, her voice barely controlled. "It's a complication of the lupus, they said. They said the next few hours are critical." Emma, always the one who needed facts to process fear, looked up at James with desperate eyes. "Is Mama going to die?" The question cut through him like a blade. In his business world, he'd learned to frame difficult truths diplomatically, but children deserved honesty, even when honesty was terrifying. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said, pulling her into his arms. "The doctors are working very hard to help her. That's all we can do right now. Wait and hope and take care of each other." Sophia, who had been unnaturally quiet, suddenly crawled into his lap and began crying with the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed too big for such a small person. James held her, feeling completely helpless as she soaked his shirt with tears. But it was Olivia's reaction that broke his heart most completely. She sat rigidly in her chair, her small hands clenched into fists, her jaw set with determination that was heartbreaking in its futility. She was trying to be strong for everyone, trying to hold their family together through sheer 5-year-old willpower. "Olivia," James said gently, "you don't have to be brave right now. You can be scared too. If I'm not brave, who will take care of Emma and Sophia?" she whispered, her voice cracking despite her efforts to sound grown up. "That's my job now," James told her, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Taking care of all 3 of you, that's what daddies do." The word hung in the air between them. It was the first time he'd claimed the title outright, and under these circumstances, it felt both natural and terrifying. Even if Olivia couldn't finish the sentence, but they all understood what she was asking. James looked at each of their faces, Emma's need for reassurance, Sophia's overwhelming grief, Olivia's desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. "Even if," he promised, "no matter what happens with your mama, you 3 are my daughters. Nothing will ever change that." The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. James found himself learning a different kind of crisis management. How to comfort a child who was too scared to eat. How to explain medical procedures in terms that didn't increase panic. How to maintain hope when his own faith was wavering. Emma asked detailed questions about kidney function and surgical procedures, processing her anxiety through scientific understanding. James answered each question as thoroughly as he could, even calling Dr. Martinez to get accurate explanations when his own knowledge fell short. Sophia alternated between clinging to James and wandering restlessly around the waiting room, her usual joy replaced by a grief that seemed to encompass not just her mother's condition, but every sad thing that had ever happened in the world. Olivia remained her stoic self until evening fell, and exhaustion began to crack her resolve. When a nurse suggested the children should go home and rest, Olivia finally broke, No, she screamed, startling everyone in the waiting room. We can't leave. What if Mama wakes up and we're not here? What if she thinks we don't love her anymore? James knelt in front of her, gently taking her small, tense shoulders in his hands. Olivia, your mama knows you love her. She would want you to take care of yourselves. But what if she? The question she'd been holding back all day finally emerged. What if she dies and we weren't here to say goodbye? The raw pain in her voice made James's own eyes fill with tears. Then we'll say goodbye in our hearts, and we'll know that the last thing she heard from us was happy birthday and I love you. Sometimes that's all we can do. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Martinez appeared in the waiting room, his scrubs still bearing traces of the long surgery. James's heart stopped as he approached, trying to read the doctor's expression for clues about Catherine's fate. The surgery went well, Dr. Martinez said, and James felt the breath he'd been holding for hours finally release. We were able to address the kidney complications. She's stable, but the next 24 hours will be crucial for her recovery. Relief flooded through the small group, but it was tempered by the realization of how close they'd come to losing Catherine. The girls peppered the doctor with questions, their fear gradually giving way to cautious hope. Later that evening, as James tucked them into their beds at home, each girl processed the day's trauma in her own way. I was really scared, Emma admitted, as he pulled her covers up. I know the medical facts, but I was still scared. Being scared doesn't mean you're not smart, James told her. It means you're human. Even doctors get scared sometimes. Sophia, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster, fell asleep holding his hand. Stay until I fall asleep, she whispered. Always, he promised. But it was his conversation with Olivia that would stay with him longest. As he sat on the edge of her bed in the darkness, she asked the question that had been building all day. If Mama had died today, what would happen to us? James knew this was a moment that would define their relationship forever. You would stay with me, he said, without hesitation. This is your home now, and I'm your father. That doesn't change because of what happens to anyone else. Promise? She whispered in the darkness. I promise, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. We're a family now, Olivia. Families stick together, especially when things get scary. For the first time since the morning's crisis began, Olivia relaxed completely, sinking into her pillow with the exhaustion of a child who had carried too much responsibility for too long. As James sat in the hallway afterward, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling around his sleeping daughters, he realized that today had changed everything. Not just because Catherine had nearly died, but because in the crucible of potential loss, he had finally, truly, become their father. 3 weeks after Catherine's surgery, she sat in the garden of their Cambridge home for the first time, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by the autumn flowers that Sophia had been tending in her absence. The recovery had been slow but steady, each day bringing back a little more of the woman James remembered from their college days. I need to thank you, Catherine said during one of their private conversations while the girls played in the oak tree above them. Not just for taking care of them during the crisis, but for becoming who they needed you to become. James watched Olivia directing the construction of an elaborate fort, Emma calculating the structural integrity of each branch, and Sophia providing musical accompaniment to their work. I didn't become anyone new, he said quietly. I just finally became who I was supposed to be all along. Catherine studied his profile, seeing changes that went deeper than the laugh lines around his eyes, or the way he absently reached for wet wipes when Sophia's hands got dirty. The James I knew 6 years ago would never have walked away from that European deal. The James from 6 years ago didn't know what he was walking away from when he chose business over love, he replied. I won't make that mistake again. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughters create chaos and joy in equal measure. Finally, Catherine broached the conversation they'd been avoiding. What happens now, James? Between us, I mean. We're not the same people we were in college. No, James agreed. We're not. You're stronger than you were then, and I'm I hope I'm wiser. But I'm not expecting us to pick up where we left off, if that's what you're worried about. Catherine looked surprised. You're not? James turned to face her fully. Catherine, I love our daughters with everything I have. And I will always have feelings for you. You gave me the 3 most important people in my life. But we need to figure out how to be good co-parents before we think about anything else. Co-parents, Catherine repeated, testing the words. I like the sound of that. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma calling from the tree. Mom, Dad, come settle an argument about physics. The casual use of Dad made both adults pause. It had happened naturally over the past few weeks, the girls transitioning from Mr. Westbrook to James to Dad without fanfare or formal announcement. Physics. Arguments are serious business, James called back, helping Catherine to her feet. Later that evening, after homework was finished and bedtime stories were read, the family gathered in the living room for what had become their nightly ritual. Catherine was finally strong enough to join them, curled in the comfortable armchair while James sat on the floor with Sophia in his lap and the twins flanking him. Tell us about when you were little, Daddy, Emma requested, continuing their ongoing project of collecting family history. As James shared stories about his own childhood, Catherine watched the easy affection between him and their daughters. Olivia absently braided his tie while he talked. Emma corrected his science facts with scholarly seriousness. Sophia dozed against his shoulder, completely secure in his presence. You know what I realized today? Olivia said during a pause in the storytelling. We're not a regular family, but we're a good family. What makes us not regular? Catherine asked, amused. Well, most families start with parents who love each other, then have babies, Emma explained with clinical precision. We started with babies, then got parents who learned to love each other. James and Catherine exchanged glances over the girls' heads, out of the mouths of babes. And that's okay? Sophia asked sleepily. That we're different? Sweetheart, Catherine said, reaching over to stroke her daughter's hair. The best families are the ones where people choose to love each other every day, no matter how they started. As the girls prepared for bed, James found himself helping with the routine that had become as natural as breathing, supervising toothbrushing, finding lost stuffed animals, adjusting nightlights to precise specifications. Daddy, Olivia said, as he tucked her in. Are you happy we found you? The question caught him off guard with its directness. Olivia, finding you 3 is the best thing that ever happened to me, even if it started with scary times with your mama being sick. Good, she said with satisfaction, because we're happy we found you too. Standing in the hallway afterward, James reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, he'd been a successful but empty man living in a sterile penthouse. Tonight, he was surrounded by finger paintings on refrigerators, homework scattered across dining room tables, and the gentle chaos of family life. Catherine appeared beside him, stronger now but still moving carefully. Regrets? She asked softly. James looked around their home, at Emma's astronomy books stacked on every surface, Sophia's artwork covering the walls, Olivia's latest masterpiece drying on the kitchen counter, and Catherine's easel set up by the window where she'd started painting again. Only one, he said. That it took me so long to understand what really matters. As they turned off the lights downstairs, James realized that his empire still existed. His company still thrived, but none of that defined him anymore. He was defined by 3 little girls who called him Dad, by a woman who'd given him a second chance at family, and by a Victorian house filled with laughter, arguments, bedtime stories, and unconditional love. He'd finally found his way home.